Okay, so to continue, now that we have gone over some study tips for everyone, let's get to the meat of the matter and talk about these 4 tent poles of learning. These are learning methods that I think you'll find are universal to everyone. And here are the 4 tent poles of learning. There is definitions, defining your words, and that includes math formulas. When you're doing math, you still need to define the words that they're using, like what is a polynomial? What is the quadratic formula? What does that mean? What do those words mean? And also the math formulas themselves. You want to be able to understand what the formulas themselves symbolize. Then secondly, we have demonstration. And that's where you demo something out and get outside of your head, get it outside of your head and in 3-dimensional space in front of you on the table. And you can do that by drawing something out, taking apart and reassembling the models. Like for anatomy and physiology, we have the bone room, which has a whole bunch of different skeleton models and muscle models in there. You can play a game. You can use cards and dice, and I'll show you an example of that here in a minute, which leads me to my third tent pole, which are examples. And this is very important because a lot of times you need to be able to see somebody else work through the problem first before you can get it, before you understand what's going on and how to do it. So examples are very important. And then the fourth tent pole is organization. You must organize your notes appropriately, and you're going to organize your notes different for different classes and for different things you're learning, because everything just depends on what class it is you're learning. You can't organize your notes the same way as you do in math as you do in your English class, for instance. Now, as I said, tent poles are learning methods that I have observed that are universal between everybody. Anybody that I've ever tutored has one of these 4 tent poles that they rely on, that they really need to learn, that they learn best with, and they're also lacking or deficient in other tent poles. So you need to use the tent poles, the learning method that the student really enjoys, that the student can get the most out of, but you also need to notice where the student is lacking, which tent pole the student is lacking in their studies, and strongly encourage them to bolster that up a little bit, to work on that. If the student never defines any of their words and they just run through what they're reading, but they're really good at memorizing formulas or demonstrating and drawing things out, you need to, go ahead and encourage them to rely on that, what they like to do, which is draw things out. But you also need to encourage them to try to start to improve their habit of looking up definitions to words they don't know and actually knowing the definitions of it. So these tent poles themselves, I call them tent poles because tent poles work together to prop up each corner of a tent's roof. All of them are necessary for holding up the tent because you need one for each corner. But sometimes you need to just adjust one or another so that they're all the proper height and strength needed for support. So let's say like this tent pole right here, this could be definitions, and this tent pole right here, this could be demonstration. I'm just going to write demo for demonstration. This tent pole right back here could be examples. And this tent pole right here would be organization. So we're going to need all 4 of these. We don't just find which tent pole the student likes and just keep hitting that again and again, because the student needs all 4 of these for their tent to be propped up appropriately. So you need to make sure you go through all 4 of these with the student in order to guarantee a complete understanding of the material for the student. So once they get into the test, they're not sitting down staring at the paper going, oh my gosh, is this what we studied? I don't even remember this. So it's very important also, because I've had other tutors come back to me and say, but I don't look up my words, I don't do definitions or whatever. And what I would say to them is that, well, I would strongly encourage you to start, looking up definitions to words, but it doesn't matter which these tent poles you associate with, whichever one you feel an affinity towards, because it's not about you. And let me write this down. It's not about you as a tutor. It's not about how you learn. It's about how the student learns. So it's not about you. So you want to make sure that the student is covering all 4 of these tent poles when they study to assure a complete understanding of the material. Now, definitions is the first tent pole. What you want to do, especially if there's a question as to where the student's at as far as understanding and literacy is concerned, you have the student read a section out loud. And as soon as the student stumbles over a word, anytime the student stumbles over a word, have the student look that word up. Don't just try to define the word based on the context that it's in. Look it up. And the student should be able to define the term in their own words. They should be able to understand it well enough that they can say back to you, explain back to you the meaning of the word. The vocabulary is so important when you're studying. If you've ever gotten to the end of a page studying and you realize that you have no idea what you just read, the entire page, chances are you've gone past a lot of words that you don't know. Or if you read to go to sleep at night, if reading makes you sleepy, it's because you're reading past words that you don't understand what the meanings of them are, and that will literally put you to sleep. There's a physiological reaction in your brain. It's part of the fight or flight response, where your brain will actually fall asleep or make you fall asleep when you're going past too many things that you don't understand the definitions to. So it's very important. Vocabulary is very important when you're studying in order to comprehend the material. So what I always tell the students to do is to make your own word bank. Make your own word bank. Make your own. Don't rely on what the teacher gives you to look up the words, vocabulary words. You need to look up the words that you don't understand, because the teacher is not going to cover every single word that you don't understand. The teacher is going to give you a basic, might give you a basic word bank vocabulary, to memorize or something, but that's just for the test. What you need to do as a student, and what you need to do as a tutor to encourage the student to do, is to make up their own dictionary, make your own glossary. Take your notebook, or you can use Quizlet, or you can use note cards, and every time the student or you personally does not understand a word that you're reading, you need to look up that word, make sure you understand the meaning of it, and write it down, and write down the word and the definition. And then that way, next time you run across that word, if you forgot what it meant again, you have an easy reference to go back and to re-look at the words. And it also helps when you're studying for a test. If you just breeze through that vocabulary list and definitions that you made on your own of things that you didn't know that you were learning, that's going to improve your learning immensely. That's going to cover repetition. It's going to cover refreshing old material that you need to refresh up on, and it's going to remind you of what all these words mean. And then logically, you're going to be able to start to think for yourself in this subject and put two and two together and really be able to apply the information. So what you're going to want to do is never read past a word or term that you don't know. Don't try to figure it out by the context. The context is the words around it, like whatever. Don't try to just read the sentence and by the sentence that it's the words in, oh, well, I'm going to assume the word means such and such. You need to look that up because there's a lot of technical terms in college classes that mean a specific thing to that class. Like there are terms that mean something very specific for math or for calculus. There are terms that mean something very specific in physics. There are terms that mean something very specific in chemistry or anatomy and physiology. And they might be a general word that we use every day, but that means something else. But if you actually look up the technical term for it, it means something a little bit different. And that's going to affect your learning if you're assuming that it means one thing and you have it wrong a little bit. So long technical, which brings me to long technical words. Long technical words, what you want to do is you want to break them up into their prefix, root, and suffix and define each. So what I mean by that is, let's say for instance, epicondyle. Okay, an epicondyle. There is condyle, which is the root word, and epi, which is the prefix. Now, if you look up epi, just epi itself means above. And condyle itself is a padded area of the bone at the joint. So the surface of the bone at a joint. And I should point out, I should say smooth surface, because that's the whole point of a condyle. It's a very smooth surface where the bones meet up at joints. So an epicondyle would be an area above the smooth surface of the bone at a joint. So an epicondyle, if you have, here's the little bone for your elbow, here's your upper bone, and then here's your lower bone, and here's your radius. So here's the joint, right? So here's the joint. So your condyles are going to be this smooth flat surface right here at the bottom of this bone, and the smooth flat surface right here at the top of this bone. Those are condyles. So an epicondyle would be above the condyles. So it would be above the condyles. So an epicondyle would be these two bumps above the condyles. So that's what an epicondyle is. So as you can see, if you break it up into a prefix and its root word, you can piece the information together and understand more about what an epicondyle actually is. Same goes for math formulas. You want to make a reference sheet of all the math formulas you're studying, whether you're in a math class or you're in chemistry. Chemistry is a big one too. But you want to have like a little piece of paper. Take a piece of paper, and instead of putting vocabulary words and their definitions on, make all of the math formulas you have that you have to memorize, and just list them. Don't make any notes on it or anything. Just list all of the formulas that you have to memorize on it and put that in the back of your notebook, so it's an easy, quick reference. So you're not having to go back pages and pages through your textbook. What was that formula again? So you have that all written out. And the actual act of writing them out and just organizing them all on one sheet of paper does wonders for your memory. It's really going to help drill that into your memory. Okay, now on to our second tent pole, which is demonstration. Demonstration, which just means to get it out of your head. Get it out of your head and into the world, into three-dimensional space in front of you on the table. You can do that by reassembling models, taking apart models. You can draw it out on a piece of paper, and in this situation you can use like cards, dice, money, especially for any kind of math problem. Especially I use cards and dice for probabilities when I'm teaching math, and I'll show you an example of that right now. So on this first question right here, I bring in, for probability, I'll bring in a deck of cards, and it'll say I'll say what is the probability of picking a queen of hearts out of a complete deck, which is 52 cards. A complete deck of cards is 52. And there's one of each kind of card in the deck. So if the probability of picking a queen of hearts out of the deck of 52 is going to be 1 out of 52, because there's only one queen of hearts and there's 52 cards. So the probability is going to be 1 out of 52. So then on the second point, this is B, you select a card, but it wasn't the queen of hearts, it was the ace of spades, and you set that down. Now, what is the probability of picking a queen of hearts out of the deck? Well, you've taken the 52 card deck and you selected one card out of it already. It was the ace of spades. So now the deck only has 51 cards in it. So it still only has one queen of hearts in there, but now you're selecting out of a smaller number of cards. You're selecting out of 51 cards. So the probability, after you've gone ahead and taken a card out of the deck, the probability of picking the queen of hearts is now only 1 out of 51, not 1 out of 52. Now what about dice? I'll use dice for a different kind of probability. And this up here, this is a specific kind of probability. And then this is another kind of probability. This is probability with subtraction and down here when you're using dice, this is going to be probability without subtraction. Prob without subtraction. And that's these two down here. So what is the probability of rolling a 5 if you roll one die? So a die, that's a singular for dice, so that we're just rolling one die. And each die has 6 sides to it. So what is the probability of rolling a 5? Well, there's only one 5 out of those 6 sides on that die, so the probability is going to be 1 out of 6, because there's only one 5 available out of 6 sides possible. So that's going to be 1 out of 6. Okay, so now just like the card example, you roll the die, and it was a 6, not a 5, so you didn't get what you wanted. Now, what is the probability of rolling a 5 from that die? Well, unlike the cards, when you selected a card out of the deck of 52 and set it down, then you ended up, your deck only now has 51 cards in it because you took one out. But when you're rolling a die, or when you're rolling dice, you're not taking anything away from it. You rolled a 5, but you're not taking that 5 off of the die and setting it aside. You still have 6 sides to the die. So what is the probability of rolling a 5 from that die on your second roll? Well, it's still going to be 1 out of 6 because there's only one 5 and there are still 6 sides to the die. So if you actually bring in cards and dice and show that to somebody if they're having difficulties understanding the different types of probabilities for your math class, then it's going to be a lot easier than just trying to explain it verbally. if you actually let them play it out and actually see what's going on in real life. And that is a really good example of demonstration, your second tent pole. Here's another example of demonstration, is to use models. And this is a model we have in the A&P lab called the bone room. So if there are any students studying anatomy and physiology, the bone room also has tutors staffed in there specifically for anatomy and physiology, and the bone room is in the library. So you'll want to, if you're tutoring a student in anatomy and physiology, you will most certainly want to take them up to the bone room in the library and use the models that they have up there. And so you can take apart and reassemble the models to understand and memorize the important concepts and the anatomy that is there that you need to study. Here's another example of demonstration. We're still on the second tent pole, demonstration. So here's a math example of drawing something out so you don't get so confused. So let's try to just turn this problem over in our heads without drawing it out on a piece of paper. A bus leaves the school to take the students on a field trip. The bus travels 10 kilometers south, 10 kilometers west, another 5 kilometers south, and 15 kilometers north. To return to the school, in which direction does the bus have to travel? How many kilometers must it travel? So, as you can see, if I had to do this problem in my head, I would look exactly like her. I would be like, oh my gosh, and I would get a crushing feeling. And if you're tutoring a student, this might be a very familiar pose to you, seeing the students hold their head in their hands and bend over toward the table like they're being crushed by some invisible weight on their shoulders. But what happens if you draw it out? Well, here we go. We drew it out. A bus leaves the school. So here's the school. Here's start to take the students on a field trip. The bus travels 10 kilometers south. So here's 10 kilometers south. And then 10 kilometers west. So here's 10 kilometers west. Another 5 kilometers south. 5 kilometers south. And 15 kilometers north. So 15 kilometers north. So it ends up right here. Here's the school field trip. To return to the school, in which direction does the bus have to travel and how many kilometers? Well, as you can see, the bus took a really weird, wild ride going to the field trip, because all it has to do is go from the field trip east 10 kilometers. Because it only has to go parallel to this route right here, this 10 kilometers west that it had, when it was on its way to the field trip. So it just needs to go east 10 kilometers. So 10 kilometers east. And so see how much easier that was when we drew it out instead of trying to calculate all of that in our heads? So demonstration, you can draw it out, is a good form of demonstration. Now on to our third tent pole, which is examples. Examples. And the first thing and the easiest thing that I want to tell you about examples is that if the student can't get a hold of you, if they don't have a tutoring session, or if they're trying to prepare for their tutoring session, they need to study up before they get to their tutoring session, and they need examples, they can watch movies. Yay, movies. So you can go on YouTube, and my tutoring channel is called Suzanne's Tutoring on YouTube. There's also Ninja Nerd Science, which is really good. Ninja Nerd Science got me through microbiology. Khan Academy is really good. And there are so many YouTube channels that are engaging and that explain concepts for college students in like 10 minutes or less. Or you can also find some that go on and give a whole hour lecture and go into detail about stuff. So always suggest to the student to go on YouTube and find examples. And you do that too, tutor. You go on YouTube and you find examples for what the student is getting ready to study in order to prepare you for your next tutoring session.